Hey everyone, welcome to the Libertarian Leadership Academy weekday podcast where I interview libertarian candidates, activists, and other issues based people who care about advancing the cause of liberty and bringing more prosperity to their neighbors, friends, and family. Today we've got a special guest. We actually have an elected libertarian, which is kind of rare. Scotty Boman has actually been involved in the Libertarian Party since 1987, and he currently serves on the Detroit Police Board of Commissioners. Welcome, Scotty.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Yeah, so you've been involved in the Libertarian Party for a long time. Can you talk about, why you even got involved and what made you decide to run for the Detroit Police Board of Commissioners?
Well, I was initially involved really back since roughly 1987. I had actually heard of the Libertarian Party even before that and had sort of considered myself a libertarian without actually having any, formal involvement. I
Sure.
I went in that direction really after reading the book Atlas, actually not Atlas Shrugged, I should say. It was actually Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. I eventually read other Ayn Rand books, but Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal was gifted to me by a friend with whom I was arguing some politics back in the day. And I was at the time a Marxist, and when I closed that book, I was something different. I had, I wouldn't say a solid objectivist, but I was definitely in that vein of thought. And my next thought, being kind of a person who had been politically involved in one manner or another in different causes along the way, really was looking for a party or a political home. And that's when I found out the Libertarian Party held to many of the same views. And then, of course, not too much later on, when I mentioned it to my friend and how I thanked her for the book and how excited I was and that I consider myself a libertarian, she was like, "Oh, no, not a libertarian. You should read more of what Ayn Rand says." But anyway, so what? She probably is the best recruiter of the party she doesn't like or didn't.
Yeah.
In any case, and then I proceeded not long after. I think 1994 was the first time I ran for office as and I ran as a for a state rep post. And early on, so a friend had suggested it would be kind of cool since there's this hockey coach, which I had heard about even long before he was in Detroit, named Scotty Boman. Actually, it's William Scott Boman, but people know him as Scotty Boman. And thought, hey, we should use that maybe on your campaign. I thought that was kind of fun. And then the next election cycle around, I had actually even put a apostrophe in front of a Y, because my middle name was Avery, and I figured, well, it's just a contraction, right? Figuring I had to do some kind of loophole. Well, lo and behold, a lot of the county clerks forgot to include that apostrophe, and eventually I had a precedent set that I could actually just go ahead and use that. And when I was even challenging, I go, well, look, the other times the Secretary of State had no problem with the Y, and it's like, oh, okay, well, in that case, I guess we have to leave it alone. Well, one of those places where I was running, and actually before I realized I could do that, though, I'd run for city council in Detroit. It was the first time I'd run for nonpartisan local office there. And that was heavily pushing the hockey coach theme. My signs even had a little stick on them, little hockey stick there. And so it kind of gone, and I got endorsed by the Detroit News that year. But I ran again, a couple other times as a libertarian, as many libertarians often put their name on the ballot because they can, and it's a chance to spread their ideas, but not necessarily a big chance of winning. And later effort because you're asking how what made me decide to run to the Board of Police Commissioners. So I'm kind of now getting into the on-ramp to that is my first run for my second run actually for nonpartisan office after the city council run was when I was running for Detroit city clerk. And in that election, at one point I had noticed, at the primary election that I was still involved with before I got primaried out, I had been going to there was a public, what do you call it, like an early voting site, but sometimes they call it, in-person absentee voting, they sometimes called it. At the time, it hadn't been quite as formalized as it is now. And it was at this community college where I also worked. So I was totally supposed to be there. I was a community college professor there. And I was also, the class was over, but I was also a resident of the city of Detroit. And they had actually opened up the campus to anyone who wanted to come in and register to vote. And for that matter, people were handing out lit for their favorite candidates and stuff. So it was all on the up and up. And I simply had noticed that the incumbent clerk had taken advantage of her position. She's still in office, by the way, had taken advantage of her position and had a whole bunch of signage up and stuff in places where it really shouldn't have been. If we were going to have fair play between her and the other candidates. In fact, probably not even legal to have some of that signage up. And later on, the Secretary of State agreed with me on that. And some of her signage had to be changed. But when I was doing that, and here's where I'm getting into what does it have to do with the police and all that. Well, what happened when I was witnessing this is I was confronted by a college police officer who gets their mandate or their oversight from Detroit police, but they were a college police agency. There's a Michigan law that allows this. And in any case, when I was taking pictures of the signage that I just mentioned, this person, one person confronted me about it, and one officer, and then some other ones joined. The long story short, I ended up detained, injured. One of my hands had become numb. I was almost prevented from going to a candidate forum that was later in the evening. And when I went to make a complaint about it to the Detroit police, I tried to have a police report written up that I'd been assaulted. They refused to do it. It's at that point that I found out there's this group of people called the Board of Police Commissioners, that you actually had a way of going over the police's head to make a complaint. And I'm like, well, that's wonderful. And so I actually went to one of their meetings, and someone who was chief investigator at the time, basically gave an instruction to some of the officers that, hey, you got to take this guy's complaint. And so I got that written up, and that enabled me to get some compensation, not a lot. But it basically, and it put on record that this assault had actually occurred. Though it's not like she was actually charged with it or anything like that. It became a civil matter. But that's kind of how I first found out about the Board of Police Commissioners. And then as time went by, I got, more involved in that process. I became friends with some of the commissioners, and learned more about that office. I ran for it twice. I ran for it in, kind of work my mind backwards here, 2017, unsuccessfully. Basically, Detroit runs in the odd year preceding. It typically 1 year after the presidential is typically how it is. 2017, I ran for police commissioner, lost, but with a respectable number of, be about a third of the vote, or maybe almost 40% of the vote, actually. So it was roughly 40-60. Did slightly worse the next time I ran in 2021. And then this last time, 2025, something amazing happened. I was almost not going to run for that office again because I'm like, why? I'm going to simply get the same percentage. I was running against the incumbent the first two times. The same voters, same candidates. I worked my ass off the second run. Spent a lot of money, put about tons of lit, and it didn't. Lots of signs, all this stuff. I knocked on every door in my district. Still didn't win. So I wasn't going to waste time and money doing exactly what I had already done before. But then what happened is this commissioner decided he wasn't going to run again. And I'm like, oh, okay. That's different. Now I'm going to run for this office. And as it would turn out, he was helping another person to get on the ballot and was circulating petitions for this guy. But he already had a propensity of ignoring a basic election law. in Michigan anyway, there's big, bold, in fact, the largest, boldest print on every petition is saying that you cannot sign, every candidate petition, that you cannot sign more petitions than there are candidates who could win that office. And as soon, and a friend of mine goes signing my petition, and then he goes to hand this person who he's backing up that petition, and she's like, no, I can't sign. I already signed Scotty's. And he's like, oh yeah, you can. Don't worry about that. And I'm just like, Commissioner, did you read what the big print on here, what it says? He was still commissioner at the time. And he's like, oh, okay. And of course he had to know. And so he walks away. But the point is, that kind of was a foreshadowing to how I ended up really what made my candidacy, my campaign, a lot easier. Was I ended up going through challenging petitions. I had done this before, where you go through and look through all those signatures and check them against, whatever records you have of residency, look at the address, is it in the boundaries, all this stuff. Is it written in a manner that fits the appropriate rules? And I went going through this guy's petitions. Well, at first glance, it looked like he had barely enough. But then I started noticing people's signatures on there that looked remarkably familiar, like they're friends of mine. And I'm like, I don't understand. Why are these people signing his petition instead of mine? I was a little bit angry.
Yeah.
And then I realized, wait a minute. These people are part of a community organization. They lived in my neighborhood organization. And I had actually gone to 2 meetings of that organization and gotten Morningside, is the name of the group, whatever, had gotten as many signatures as I could at one meeting. One again got as many as I could at that meeting. I pretty much saturated those people. So I looked at the date of the meetings, looked at my own petitions, and saw, oh, wait a minute. I have, I have enough, I have these people's signatures on my petition, and he had gone to the meeting after those 2. So he was later. Well, if you sign the first time you sign, it's legal. The second time, based upon that rule I just described, it's not legal. So the way the law is written is that in the event that the same person's signature appears on 2 competing petitions, the first one counts, and the one that done at a later date does not count. I mentioned a date instead of first and second because if it's on the same date and different times, they both get omitted. Probably because time isn't something that's on the petition. And I found lots of them because I remember it, because actually I just had to look up the date of the meeting I wasn't at, and that's when he got those names. He was under by 10 signatures. So this is something that the clerk would not have done, cross-referencing petitions. That would have been too complicated. They could do validity, but that's complicated. And sat up all night doing this before that deadline. Spent the entire day in that office filling out forms because they made you do a form for every signature you're challenging.
Oh my gosh.
It was ridiculous. And so I'm like, you're kidding. I already got it all here on like one document. And they're like, no, we need a separate page for each one. And so, So anyway, that basically won me the election. I thought something was going to drop. I really did. I thought the guy was going to do a court challenge. There was none. I thought that there would be some kind of, formidable write-in thing that some people would get behind. No one submitted anything to run as a write-in candidate. So technically, if you only count the valid votes and not the ones that were spoiled, I got 100%. And awesome. There you go. Yeah.
So what does commissioner do on the Detroit Police Board?
And that's a good question, because a very common misconception, in fact, that incumbent I couldn't beat was a retired veteran police officer. And people thought, oh, he's a cop. Boman isn't. Boman has no business being a police commissioner. But that misses exactly what the Board of Police Commissioners is for. What the Board of Police Commissioners is for is civilian oversight of the Detroit Police Department. In other words, we are over them, and we are not one of them. Now,
Yeah.
just to show you how things can get very confusing, they gave me this object, which might make people think I am one of them. This is a police commissioner badge, not to be confused with a police top. It is, I guess, we're top brass because we're above, but the chief has a badge that looks a lot like this. Now,
Yeah.
lower ranks carry silver badges. Chiefs and assistant chiefs get the brass badges. So do commissioners, even though we are not part of the police compartment. We are civilian oversight. What does civilian oversight do? We basically police the police. Now, there's a couple levels of that. One of them is you got the regular criminal justice system that might treat police fairly, but often treat them better than fairly. We also have something called internal affairs. Internal affairs sometimes can be very strict, but it's an internal thing, and therefore it's still police policing police. And so this is a different aspect. This is civilian oversight. Now, there is some division of duty. So if we find that the police officer has probably committed an outright crime, that would be, a misdemeanor or a felony, that still has to go to internal affairs, and it may also end up in regular criminal court. But anything other than that, violations of policy, procedure, other matters that may involve, but potentially could later lead to civil liability. Those are things where we can actually have consequences for the misconduct of the officers if and when that occurs. And we review large amounts of cases. There are a considerable number of complaints that need to get reviewed, and to ignore them, the city really does that at its peril, because what happens is, the city could kind of just let the police do what they want and not really have any teeth and any consequences when they do wrong. But then the problem is we get into lawsuits when that happens, because then people sue for damages and the city inevitably settles and pays out lots of money. I saw one case recently where the city council had approved $500,000 for a settlement. At which point I quickly inquired with the DPD, and they didn't get me the info yet, but it's kind of like, okay, who was it that was the officer involved when this happened, and what happened? I mean, come on, $500,000, and the city just kind of settled on it. It must have been pretty darn bad. If that's a settlement, that isn't even won in court. That'd be pretty bad.
Yeah. So, but you haven't got any information on that, so they didn't send
Not
it to
on
you?
that one yet. We actually have a process we've been pushing for, at least myself and one other commissioner. There's 11 of us all together, but the other ones seem like they might be on board, depending on how the final wording goes. Are actually pushing for a process by which information is put into a neat, orderly table where it's easy to match up and cross-reference this. Because on one hand, somewhere along the way, there was an investigation of this officer, but we have lots of investigations, thousands maybe, or somewhere over there. Somewhere else, we have we have the docket of the city council and what they have to vote to appropriate. They control the purse strings, what money gets spent. And so that's a line item there of money they spend. And there isn't a bridge. The only bridge between the two, I think, is the case numbers. But we don't have a system set up to cross-reference this data. So that's one thing we brought up at the meeting. It's like, put this together so human beings can look at it. Because otherwise it's sort of like buried and partially hidden, even though it's public information.
Gotcha. So are you able to actually go after police misconduct as a board?
Yeah.
So if you find out this officer has continued to violate, police procedure, are you able to have any disciplinary action against him?
Yes. One thing that we are often have come before us is that there is the chief will often decide, and this may even include criminal behavior here, because now this would be something the chief is recommending, not necessarily The chief investigator is under us, investigates for the BOPC, mainly those
Gotcha.
non-criminal complaints. The chief of police is, well, he's the top cop. And so if internal affairs finds there's some issues with some of the members of the department, then he may decide some penalties such as suspension without pay, or suspension with pay, or without pay with medical benefits. There's variations on this, and we get to vote on that. So we would look at the case, look at the circumstances, and decide whether or not this officer's conduct has risen to the level of one of those options being applied, or which option should be applied, because there is always the option of not suspending too. So that's one thing we have. That's some of the teeth we have. Another area in which we have some teeth is, and this thing is a little quirkish, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more, is that we are supposed to be the final word on promotions. According to the city charter, it's quite clear that in order to get promoted, the Board of Police Commissioners must vote in favor of that police department member's promotion to another rank. So we could hold people back. Now that's the law. Unfortunately, there's a twist to this, but we're working on it. And the twist is that, and the one case where this really sticks in my mind is that, because I had actually been involved as an activist bringing attention to this case, was we had and I don't know if you've heard of these people before. I don't know, what community are you in?
I live in Washington State.
You probably hadn't heard of this then. But it was what it was. We had this, but it was pretty well almost household news. Like almost everyone knew about it in Southeast Michigan. That there was a case where a corporal at the time, Corporal Dwayne Jones, had driven this woman who was having a bit of a crisis named Shelby Smith to the hospital. She, part of her crisis was that she had actually disrobed at one point and was walking around publicly that way, which, I mean, as a libertarian, I think everyone has a right to do that. But I know maybe not all libertarians would feel that way either. But but the point was, I think there were other issues, and she probably did need some help. So at first it seemed almost like a humanitarian mission, and he had given her a blanket to cover with. But then when they got to the hospital at the emergency room, at this point she's now a patient. She's at the hospital, and apparently she didn't want him touching her. Word is, though now for other reasons, I haven't been able to actually get any direct communication from her. But apparently, according to her sister, who had talked to her sometime after that, she said that he had actually touched her, that she didn't just go off like a lot of people, like the police were saying she did, in a manner that may have been inappropriate. That's what she had said anyway. But we have on video, here's what is important. The whole thing would have gotten brushed under the rug. No one would even have known this had happened had it not been for somebody sitting around with a cell phone in the emergency room deciding to record the interaction between her and two officers. Actually, there was this corporal and someone else who was with them on that drive, and that both of them had he ended up punching her while the other one held her in place for a bit. I think there was some hospital security that kind of wanted to stop but didn't really do anything to intervene. He was literally punching her out rapidly, and it's all on video. While she's naked, and of course they blur her a little bit out of respect for her modesty or whatever. But it was quite a horrific thing, and so because of that, he ended up initially getting suspended, but he got suspended with pay, so it wasn't that harsh. But he got suspended. At least he wasn't out there on the street, and he did go to court. He was actually found guilty of assault in court, and he had also been, you know, and so he had this all on record. And the Board of Police Commissioners had unanimously voted to deny him a promotion from corporal to lieutenant. By the way, he did appeal the case, and I'll get to that in a minute. But had he wanted to get promoted from corporal to lieutenant, and apparently the way the union contract is written is you just have to kind of meet some milestones, mostly involving taking some exams and tests to show that you have made improvement in some area of the profession, and with no disciplinary aspect to that. And so, but the charter plainly said no promotion without going to the Board of Police Commissioners. So the police commissioners had voted unanimously to deny his promotion. Well, in spite of that, what ends up happening is that he appeals it to an arbitrator, and the arbitrator's union does, and the arbitrator decides that the contract supersedes the city charter.
Oh.
Yeah. And so for the moment, we've had the proper authority of the Board of Police Commissioners usurped by that. There could be additional court battles, but probably the best approach at the moment, because they're about to reboot contract negotiations, because their contract is set to expire in 2027. And so rather than working without one, they're going to try to negotiate everything well in advance so they have a smooth transition to their next contract. And basically, I'm working with some people. There's another commissioner on board with this. Also, we might get more than a couple commissioners. It's just right now there's one who actively was pursuing this approach, was to set up an ad hoc committee to get the Board of Police Commissioners wrapped up into the negotiating process. And we have a new mayor, so that she might take a path different from her predecessor, who really didn't do anything about that. And so, hopefully anyway. So what we're going to do is we're going to be trying to keep hands on, or be at least close monitoring and sounding off on anything in the negotiating process that isn't really kosher. And my general opinion is that a person who negotiates a contract that takes away or usurps parts of the city charter has no business having that position, because their position only exists because of the city charter. And if you're going to try to undermine the city charter, then you are effectively undermining the legitimacy of your own office.
Sure.
And that's how I see it. That's how I see formative documents in general. When you have offices formed by formative documents, to say that the document itself is irrelevant because you got power, I'm sorry, your power comes from the document.
Yeah. Well, for a union to try to usurp the city charter is kind of outrageous. Like,
I would think, but now the union's job is to represent the interests of their workers as much as possible.
Sure.
And so I understand that they'll take whatever they can get, even if it didn't totally fit the city charter. The people representing the city government itself, it seems to me that they should be handcuffed by the city charter. I don't mean literally like we arrest them. I simply mean that they are restrained. There are restraints on the powers of the elected. There's restraints on my powers, thank goodness. There's restraints on everyone's powers, thank goodness. And there are people that go rogue and say, well, I don't care. I'm going to do this anyway. Try to stop me. But in principle, that's just wrong. You have limited power, and that power is in that document, and you have no business going beyond that. So those people trying to negotiate a way for someone else, in this case, the members of the Detroit Police Department, to be somehow immunized from the authority of the Board of Police Commissioners, that to me is malfeasance. They shouldn't be doing that. Now, that being said, I do believe probably the sworn officers, like, you got to remember the oath. I heard them swear it at a graduation ceremony. But I believe they are at some point mentioning the city charter. But if they don't, maybe they should. Maybe we should add that. And in which case, how could they vote against something that would go against the charter? But right now, I'm not sure they really are so constrained. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
Williams for JP said, outrageous indeed. Unions are supposed to ensure fair pay and safe environments. Now they are money machines in some cases.
Yeah, in this case, I wouldn't say it's so much the money machine aspect of them simply really taking on powers that are not legitimate.
Yeah.
In the sense of trying to override the city itself. And as far as money goes, I mean, yeah, of course you're negotiating. This person did say better pay, right? Yeah, and I guess maybe I'm a little biased in this manner, is that I am a member of AFT 2000 and AFT, one of the other locals. So I'm in a couple locals because I'm a professor. And so locals of American Federation of Teachers. So yeah, I have some bias that way, in the sense that, yeah, I appreciate what unions are able to do as far as improving our working conditions. But this is a different matter here in a way, because usually, usually we're talking about, people, workers and individuals employed dealing with a boss in a manner that is really, it's almost like they're protecting the rights of the individual. Here, you got police that have the special authority that they can deprive rights of an individual. I mean, to the extent that that they can show there's probable cause that there's a crime, that you violated one of the laws that the state has written, or the city or the feds have written. Well, so that's what she says.
So this police officer beat up a naked woman in a hospital and still kept his job. And then
he got a promotion. He still works there
for promotion. He still works there too.
Yes, he is still a member of the Detroit Police Department. I didn't finish the story. I'm sorry. I did say he was convicted of assault. Well, he did get a retrial, and there was a hung jury. And then, rather than going for another trial, the defense or the prosecution just allowed him to work out a deal. And the deal was that he simply takes some classes or something, and that they would simply dismiss the charges. So now he's got a clean record. But that being said, remember earlier I said the Board of Police Commissioners oversees non-criminal complaints. So what? Okay, that if he's got a clean record, he wasn't convicted of assault. All right, then he simply beat her up and somehow did it legally. Well, now that's our non-criminal complaint.
Yeah.
Now, okay, you're going to say it's not criminal because he's not guilty. Okay, well, he still did something wrong.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, Scotty, we are 3 minutes over. We normally keep it at 30 minutes. Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to share to encourage other libertarians, candidates to run for office and keep running?
Yeah, I would say, and definitely whatever office you choose to run for, there's value in doing it. And there will be different kinds of value in running for different offices. The way I ran a nonpartisan thing, you really, since it doesn't have the party label attached in my case, you really have to make it about winning. And that's the best time to run for that. And if you can win, hey, they can make a bigger difference than all the shouting in the world can do. But otherwise, I think there is value also in running for partisan offices to get the libertarian message out there, to simply offer voters an alternative if they actually don't want to vote for a statist, but they want to use their vote to make a statement. Now they can vote for someone else who isn't so much a statist, hopefully not at all, but a spectrum. And then there's also ballot access. In some states, certain offices getting votes secures your ballot access. It does here. So there's different reasons to run. but hopefully in all cases that you're ultimately doing it to advance the principles of liberty and limited government and freedom.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Scotty. I really appreciate what you're doing. Looking forward to having you back on. If you got any other good information that you'd like to share in the future, please reach out.
Thank you very much, Michael, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yep. You have a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Well.